Breakfast Live Online. We may have a little bit of technical difficulties, but we'll give this a try. We are in Denver, Colorado, and here for the Mountain Connect conference. It's been a great event. We've had one day. There's another day that's happening today, and we have a great group of panelists that are here with us to reflect on and to talk about some of the things that we've seen and learned from Mountain Connect. Let's go ahead and do introductions here, and we'll just go down the line here. We have a really diverse group of people, and not just diverse in terms of the entities and the companies or organizations that you represent, but also diverse in terms of your roles, right? We've got finance people, we've got lobby folks, we've got academics, we've got operators. So let's go ahead and introduce one another.
Sure, Drew. Thanks for having me. My name is David Don. I am the SVP for Public Policy at Comcast, and I've been in this space for about 25 years, doing both wireless and wireline broadband issues. So looking forward to talking today with everyone here and getting everyone's experience from this conference.
Thanks for making the time, David. Christopher.
Yeah, again, good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Christopher Alley. I am the Pioneers Chair in Telecommunications and a professor of telecommunications in the Donald P. Belisario College of Communications at Penn State University, and I research and write about broadband policy planning and deployment.
You got to mention Farm Fresh.
I am also the author of the book Farm Fresh Broadband, The Politics of Rural Connectivity, which came out 2 years ago now, and it still seems to be circulating around these spaces. So very proud of it.
Well, thanks, Drew. My name is Pierce Verchick. I am the head of broadband lending at Live Oak Bank. We specialize in senior credit facilities for broadband operators around the country, doing anything from M&A finance to project finance for operators.
Angela.
Thank you. I am Angela Medic, and I am the general manager of Kitsap Public Utility District in Washington State. And I've been in this space for 15 years, working on rural broadband and expanding it throughout Washington State.
And as odd as it is, the microphone's right here, even though the camera's there. Yeah, you can look there, but you can speak here. Okay. And we're starting, just for our audience, thank you for being here with us. We had a little bit of technical difficulties leading up to it. We can't promise we won't have them, but we're giving it a try. It looks like you're live, but do speak up, because the show floor is beginning to come to life, right?
It is, yeah.
So Steve, go ahead and say a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Drew. Steve Schwerbel with WISPA. I am our state advocacy manager. In that capacity, I help manage our member relationships with broadband offices and legislatures across all 50 states. Prior to that, I spent about 7 years in the Wisconsin state legislature, staffing legislators who primarily focused on broadband issues and rural concerns. At the very end of that time, I was the clerk for the Utilities Committee on the Senate side. So a little bit of broader experience.
Okay. Well, here at Mountain Connect, and of course, welcome to all of you. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. We are at Mountain Connect. This is a conference I've been to probably 4 or 5 times. It's taken on a new form being here in Denver, and it's probably 30 or maybe even 50% larger than it was last year. So it's growing as many broadband events and happenings are growing. And Colorado is a unique place because there's quite a bit of rural presence here, and yet there's also a really strong history of telecommunications and cable industry innovation here in Denver. So it's an interesting place to be. Have any of you been to Mountain Connect previously, and what is different about this year? And let's just, again, go down the line here.
Drew, this is my first visit.
Okay.
As you mentioned, as broadband deployment across this country becomes a top priority, we're Comcast. We're starting to participate more in events like this, starting to learn more about priorities, speaking a lot with government officials, local and state officials, and trying to learn about what we're going to take to get this to the next level. So Mountain Connect was a great opportunity for us to meet with a lot of folks in a short period of time, including a lot of these fellow panelists of mine. So it's great to be here.
So just to follow up, David, Comcast is obviously a national company, but do you focus on particular geographies? Where do you think of yourself as being sort of centered around?
We focus on the geography of about 40 states, so we're pretty broad. There are about 10 states we're not in at the moment. So we'll and everything we're talking about with BEAD and expansion, we're looking at it across our footprint.
Mhm.
So we have obviously sort of regions and divisions, and they're all taking very seriously the opportunities and the need to get everyone connected. So whether you're in Florida or out here in the West, Comcast has a presence pretty much almost everywhere in the country.
Mhm.
And so we're looking at the gaps that need to be filled,
Yeah.
and what role BEAD can play and what role we can play in bringing that public-private partnership.
Yeah.
So that's why we're kind of here learning from folks about what's been working. You know, there are a lot of folks who have been doing it a lot longer than we have, filling in those gaps. So it's an opportunity for us to learn and also, of course, talk about our strengths and what we bring to the table.
Right. Christopher.
Yeah, this is also my first Mountain Connect. I am loving it. I am learning so much, meeting a lot of great people. And I think from my perspective as an academic, it's both an amazing opportunity to be able to share what I've been working on some of my research, but also just to sit and learn and listen to what everyone's priorities are. And how I can help in any sort of way in these conversations as well. So
Right.
quite a privilege to be here, and it definitely won't be my last Mountain Connect.
Mhm. Pierce.
This is probably Live Oak's third Mountain Connect. We enjoyed kind of having it in the remote kind of Keystone Resort area. Beautiful.
Yeah, it used to be up in the mountains, and now it's
Yeah.
easier on the plane trips, but harder on the eyes. I suppose.
Much easier to commute here than logistically figuring out the Keystone Resort. But I think one of the biggest differences, like you mentioned, with the excitement and more attendees at this show than in years prior, it really, I think, all boils down to BEAD and how real it is and how real the dollars are that are coming into the industry. In years prior, it was always a struggle to demonstrate the need for more dollars to go into the right hands for operators to expand broadband. And so now it kind of feels more real. And I think you kind of feel that on the show floor and the sessions where there's a little bit more buzz from attendees about that.
Here, say another word or two about Live Oak Bank and what you do, what you are and what you do as a lending institution.
Yeah, sure. So we're an FDIC insured bank. We're out of North Carolina, but we lend nationwide. And really what we do in our vertical lending team is still focus on senior debt. But we also try and take an approach when possible to help with the letter of credit issue that's coming up. I know it's a huge topic of discussion. It's a pain point. We're honestly for getting out of that and not requiring that.
Interesting. A bank doesn't want to let our credit requirement. Newsflash.
It ties up capital
that
could be going to build broadband. So really, we want to be focused in part of the project phase. We want to help in that public-private partnership. We want to provide dollars to expand rather than tying them up on the side.
Okay. Angela, how about you? You've been here before, haven't you?
Been here before, and I have to say it's changed quite a bit from being up in the mountains. It used to be much, I want to say quaint, but that's the positive way. It was much more kind of this engagement at a smaller level that I know I brought one of my commissioners with me to teach her about broadband the first time she went to the conference, and it was great because she got to talk with so many different people, a lot bigger. But I think it is the focus is, you know, with all this money coming out, with Colorado leading in some of the legislative changes, it makes sense for this to become a bigger show, bringing more people. And the excitement here right now is, I mean, I can feel it where you have this, all the vendors here know there's money coming, right? There is money coming out. And how are we going to use that to better serve our communities?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Steve.
I will break the tie and say I'm another newbie. So I can't speak to the history, but it's had a great buzz this year so far, and been a really exciting event to come attend. My position with WISPA is really only about a year and a half old. Recently to that, we've really been focused on federal regulatory issues and federal lobbying, and that is obviously starting to change. And to see the conversation moving down to the state level, obviously, but the importance of having that local policy itself. So It's really exciting to be able to meet all the folks here from all different walks of life. We're really interested in making things work the right way and make sure that it's in a way that makes those dollars go as far as possible. So,
well, we're about a quarter way in, and knock on wood, it appears to be working. I'd love to just ask some of our live guests to chime in the chat window if you have any difficulty seeing or hearing us. We're going to continue as if it's working, but appreciate your patience if it isn't. And I also want to say two other kind of preliminary words I probably missed in my intro. We want to express thanks to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. We're here in their booth at Mountain Connect. They graciously let us use this space, which we thought would be a little quieter, but as I said, it's beginning to heat up as some people come out and want to be part of the effort here. And I also want to give a thanks to the sponsors of the Broadband Breakfast Club. We wouldn't be able to do our programming, most of which we do for free, without the support of our sponsors. They include Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, Comcast, Nokia, BroadbandToolkit.com, the ComLaw Group, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, Michael Baker International, Bitstream Communications, and Positron Access. Thank you to our sponsors for your support. Let's turn to the sessions and the vibe and the messages from Mountain Connect. And let's actually start in the center. Angela, what's been the highlight for you? Again, we were only one day in, there's another full day here. And I kind of texting some people just arrived last night after, travels from hell. Other people are leaving this morning to experience more travels from hell. So what is your take thus far, Angela?
Thus far, I think what's really exciting is, and I really have to give Mountain Connect the kudos to do this, bringing all the state broadband office individuals in and hearing from them on the challenges, but also the excitement they have in serving their communities. That has to be, for me, a unique part of this conference so far. And being able to also see that.
And remember to speak up.
Okay, being able to also see that you have some broadband office with very little knowledge and some broadband office with 30 years industry experience.
Right.
And I think that's awesome for here, but it's also going to be our challenge stepping into the next 6 months is working and supporting different state offices. And I have to say, I neglected to say something as well. I'm also the chair of the American Association for Public Broadband. And really, that is so exciting to work and to see all the states and what they're doing and how that ties into how municipalities and small communities can support building that out.
Angela, one of the things I've chatted about with several people here is that this conference has traditionally been known for a lot of municipalities, right? And Colorado has in some ways been sort of a forerunner in a lot of ways. Do you want to speak just a bit to that?
Well, I think what's exciting is the legislature allowed for different communities to take it into their own hands and have that freedom of choice and be able to say, I'm going to put this on the ballot, and if it passes, then my community can do this. And then just this year, the governor actually rescinded that law and said, you know what?
Well, not just the governor, the legislature passed and the governor signed.
And that's right. It only makes press when the governor signs. So but the reason they did that was because every ballot initiative that has been on the vote, put up to vote, passed.
Yeah.
So why focus that money and effort on taking that to a ballot initiative versus just saying, yes, you can do this if you choose to.
Well, the other aspect of this, and again, let's get other comments on this, but in the Q&A session with Brandy Ryder and Senator John Hickenlooper yesterday, I asked her about the impact of the repealing of HBL 152. And she said it was important because it means that municipalities can now apply for BEAD without having to have done that process. Prior to that, they would have had to pass one of the whatever it's called, exemptions or
And with the requirements that NTIA has put out saying this has to be awarded within a year, it wouldn't have worked. Right? You wouldn't have been able to do that.
Other thoughts? What have you observed or learned or plan to learn if you just arrived from Mountain Connect here? Christopher?
Yeah, I mean, the three things that are coming to mind are obviously BEAD, states, and communities. And something I really appreciated here is listening to the stories of communities whom I have not heard of before. They get the opportunity in a platform to tell their stories and their successes. And some of the panels that I really enjoyed going to are the panels around how to reach people we would not normally be reaching with our programming, right? How do you reach those unconnected people? How do you reach those reluctant communities? How do you reach, I went to a great panel around how to bring folks in the disability community into broadband and into connectivity. I think those are really empowering. Those are some immediate best practices that listeners in that audience can take and implement tomorrow, right? I mean, yes, we all need to be focusing on 5-year broadband plans and initial proposals at the state level. But what I'm getting is a lot of tools that folks can take home and implement as they wait for BEAD money to happen. And that is just so empowering to listen to these stories. So I've been going to a lot of these community panels and just loving them.
Right.
I think that's a great point. And just the mix of ideas and perspectives in some of the conversations have been really terrific. You've seen, I think, conversations and questions to broadband officers from all kinds of technology providers, whether it's fiber or fixed wireless or even satellite, and also the range of stakeholder opinions and viewpoints that I might not have seen if I hadn't gotten out and seen it firsthand. So very much appreciate it.
Here's how about you? What are you hearing in terms of the matching funds that are needed? How does Live Oak play into this? What are your ears perking up on this question of funds?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first off, the biggest difficulty in any large, whether it's grant funding program or capital project, is coming up with the source of funds. And for most lenders out there, they're trying to find that balance of partnering with the communities that need it most, but then also how the economics of that program work. And that's why it's so important for the state associations, for the governing bodies to actually do the due diligence up front to give proper funding in the buckets that we're looking at. If you're looking at a fiber project in a coastal community versus a fiber project in Denver, those are going to look and cost a lot different because you're looking at buried versus aerial. You're looking at a lot of different variables that are ultimately going to drive up or down that cost. And so really, I think the biggest value for me in the sessions and in the discussions with attendees is the different perspectives, like many panelists have mentioned, because it may not be a one size fits all, and we need to be willing to have that discussion. Even if we arrive at the same conclusion, I think the discussion is very important.
David, I know you just arrived last night, but what reports have you heard? What are you looking forward to learning about and participating in here today?
Yeah, Drew. So I was one of those with some travel issues. I was almost doing this remotely from Oklahoma City. I think we were circling Oklahoma City. I thought we were going to land there, but it's great. I made it in yesterday and looking forward to learning a lot today. In particular, I'm thinking about the public-private partnerships, right? That's the way this is. The whole BEAD program is interestingly set up. Number one, the federal government delegated a lot of responsibility, of course, to the state and local authorities, with sort of NTIA having a review process, but really depending heavily on the work done at the state and local level. But then the other key piece, of course, is the public-private partnerships. The realization that in order for this to work, we're going to need commitments, whether it's financial, whether it's experiential, that are going to partner with these local communities to make it work, right? There's a matching fund requirement. There is, qualification requirements. And if you look back, we've had some missteps over the years, whether it was some BTOP money that was wasted, RDOF, we're kind of trying to figure out what's working and what isn't there. So the real question for me is lessons learned, and how are we going to improve with this fund, this pot of money, to really get to the goal. We have to keep our eye on the prize and make sure we get to that 100% connectivity. And the one challenge is $42 billion is a lot of money. And 2 years ago was even more money, right? But as we see with inflation, supply chain, labor challenges, all of these things are making it more expensive and more difficult to reach the goal. And I'm hoping today we start getting in a little bit of brass tacks in the meetings I'm going to attend, listening like, okay, how do we take it from that theoretical and wow, 42 billion to what's it going to cost to really build? What are these letter of credit requirements, matching fund requirements, qualification requirements, who are you partnering with? So really exploring that as we get to brass tacks. I mean, we're looking at plans due before the end of the year, and then the funds are going to start flowing pretty quickly. And it just not going to feel as much as it did 2 years ago when 42 passed. That 42 today with inflation is now maybe worth about 38, 35 maybe. And that puts pressure on getting to that 100% connectivity goal. And also how we connect people, whether we talked briefly about ACP off camera.
Yeah, we'll come back to that,
looking to
definitely.
explore that as well a little bit today.
Yeah, ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. I wanted to turn to that, but first, I want to just ask you, David, has Comcast traditionally participated in federal broadband programs? Yes or no? And what's worked? And what are your thoughts on the way your company, obviously one of the biggest broadband providers in the country, is considering getting involved in BEAD?
Sure. So we have not participated traditionally in like a USF or BTOP or BEAD. We do have a lot of experience with public-private partnerships on the adoption side, and our Internet Essential program really was that partnership going back over a decade. But on infrastructure construction, no, we have the resources, the scale, right, to be able to do what we've accomplished over 60 years, wiring over 60 million homes and businesses to broadband. So no, this is not the space we've participated heavily in the past, but we will. And there are some state programs we did over the last
under
few
ARPA,
years.
for example.
Under ARPA, and even pre-ARPA, there were some in the Northeast I'm familiar with, and I think maybe even in Colorado we might have done some. But no, the scale of BEAD is a whole other level. We are ramping up our ability to participate. And look, we think we bring a lot to the table. I mean, I previewed it a little bit, but we bring financial wherewithal. Right. We have the capability. We're going to be front in line on getting access to fiber. Right. When there's going to be, you have these Buy America provisions, there's limited suppliers. We're at the front of line because we bring a lot of scale to it. So we know we're going to meet our commitments and deadlines and get to the goal. So we bring that. Well, one of the things we're not talking about, I haven't heard too much about, is cybersecurity.
Yeah.
We have 300 employees that I'm aware of that are committed to cybersecurity. Right. We fought against 6 billion attacks in 2020 alone.
Wow.
Right. So we are going to bring that to the table. We're going to bring matching funds. We're willing to go in big with our matching funds because we want to do this. We see a lot of economies of scale expanding out from where we are, and the government really filling that gap to make what was an uneconomic build more economical with the BEAD funds. So we're leaning in heavily and looking forward to winning some of these opportunities.
Let's just continue on this thread of public-private partnerships and matching funds that David has just spoken about. And the 25% matching funds requirement is a floor, not a ceiling. States can set higher amounts. And as we saw in the middle mile grant awards, I mean, it was really effectively a 93% matching fund because those entities that put in more funds were more likely to receive awards. I'm not sure if that rule will hold true in the BEAD process, but I'd love to get Steve and Angela and everyone's take on what is the role of partnerships and matching funds in going after BEAD. Let's start with you, Steve.
Well, it's such an interesting question. And one of the things that I love about being here is getting to see all those 50 laboratories of democracy and finding the best ideas from those. I'll go back to the example of my home state of Wisconsin, which has had its own homebrew state grant program for a little over 10 years now, I believe, and has been very successful in expanding broadband to the rural areas that we are challenged by. We don't have a legislative priority on a certain threshold for requirements, but over the history of the program, I'd say we're at about 50%. However, there have been individual communities in Wisconsin that need more help. So just recently, I think our PSC funded a program that only had a 3% match to a tribal area that just couldn't afford to put up more than that. We want communities, we want providers to have a stake in the game. They need to have that skin there to have that stake, but we also want to have the flexibility to respond to the communities that need it most, right? We've gotten out to the low-hanging fruit. How do we reach the communities that are the biggest challenges? Our members have been in that space for a long time now, connecting those communities that nobody else can get out to because they see the need. But we want to make sure that states maintain and request the flexibility to really consider the best tool for the job, but also the right number to make sure that we're keeping that responsibility high, but also using the tools that we have at our disposal to get out to the communities.
Let me remind everyone to raise your voices, particularly you two on the end. You're doing a good job, but keep it up even higher. Let me ask you one more question, Steve, about WISPs, wireless internet service providers. There's been a lot of talk over the last year and a half about the kind of preference for fiber that we see from the NTIA. Now, states have flexibility. There will not be 100% fiber everywhere. But what are your thoughts about the role of wireless, or whether your own members are going to get more involved in fiber? Do you have thoughts on that, Steve?
It's a yes and, right? There needs to be, and I was heartened yesterday morning, a panel moderated by my good friend Steve Coran. The NTIA representative said there is going to be a real place for fixed wireless, and it needs to have a role. And I think everybody's recognizing that. I think even more so now that states really know what their distribution is, they're looking at their numbers and saying, how can I make that dollar stretch as far as possible? Because remember, it's not just about connecting the underserved and unserved communities. It's also about getting to your community anchor institutions.
Yep.
And then doing equity, right? Need without equity is just bad. And so how do you make sure that you're able to keep that investment strong and not only put it into one or two buckets? It has to include wireless, but it's also going to include our members going back and putting out fiber where they haven't been able to before. It's going to include every solution, I think. We say, what is the right tool for the right job, right? And I think states are going to be able to really find some creative ways to prioritize using the right tool for an individual project. States have been looking really interestingly, some conversation yesterday about lumping in project areas together. So maybe not an individual 25% match per individual project proposed, but maybe a broader project area can get to a 25% match. So I'm really excited to see states thinking creatively about how they can use that match in ways that really incentivize good behavior.
Yeah, the floor is definitely coming live, so we're going to be battling against them for the rest.
$42 billion. People are going to wake up early.
Got money.
Angela, Pearson, Chris, what are your thoughts on the matching funds and the partnerships?
I think in Washington State, public utility districts have everything we've done is public-private partnerships, right? We have been focused on rural. As municipalities, we can do 20-year return on investments, but not providing that end user experience and relying on the service providers to do that. Everything's been a public private. So I think when we look at matching and we look at some of those things, I gotta say, David hit it. In 2009, we got a VTOP grant and built across the state middle mile. And we were saying we need $1 billion, right? We need $1 billion to build everyone. We're getting 1.2, and we're like, yeah, that's not enough, right? And so, I mean, it's been a huge change, and so we will need to have those partnerships. I think in Washington State, we're doing the same type, looking at the same type of thing, where we have a project here and a project over here and being able to pull those together. The legislature also put forward some matching funds. And so there is matching funds now for BEAD implementation through Washington State. But still it's not going to check the box for everywhere. So we have to have those engagements. I've specifically talked to one local service provider who is open to doing that, right? Open to helping drive that expansion and provide that matching funds. And so I think we all just have to be creative. And I think that's the key as we step forward is every model works, right? At some level, and each community is going to need something slightly different to serve them. And so I think we just need to be really open about it. Now, the line, what was the other thing? The
matching funds and partnerships.
So the matching funds are going to be a challenge for small organizations. They're going to be a huge challenge. I'm not sure how a city with a part-time mayor is going to pull up 25% of a matching fund. So I think it's going to be integral to provide those partnerships.
And if I could just jump in, one thing I'd love to see is to make sure that states have safeguards in place to make sure that those communities are not shut out in favor of those who happen to have a larger piggy bank, right? And I think this is actually where, as we're thinking about public-private partnerships, where unexpected groups can come into the fold. And an example here would be local philanthropic organizations who are keen to invest in this space and who are keen on seeing that improvement in their communities. And I've talked to a number of philanthropic groups who want to be involved, and matching grants and assisting in this way is a great way for them to be involved in this process. So I think when we're looking for our public-private partnerships, we got to think out of the box, right? We got to think out of the box because we're all in this together. So let's look at those organizations who are doing other work to support our communities, and maybe they can get involved and cough up. We saw some great examples in Virginia and in Texas around what philanthropic groups are doing to support broadband and digital equity in their communities. I'd love to see that still keep going as we work into BEAD.
Please.
But Steve mentioned skin in the game, and that's important. But I think what we're also saying is here stretching the dollar.
Yeah.
And the more matching funds you might get in those communities that have more resources, let's say, that's more opportunity maybe for these other communities that are less resourced, right? So if you do, you want to raise that bar, you want to get as much matching. Look, the middle mile program you referenced is an example. They were able to stretch out the number of communities.
Doubling it.
I mean, take $1 billion and turn it into,
1.9.
exactly. And you're able to do that by having these high matching standards. So I think we're going to have these trade-offs, because the goal is to get to 100%. And if we don't get there, are we going to be able to deem this a success? And Congress is not going to allocate another round of funds anytime soon. I think most people know.
So David, just to be clear, like when Comcast is going to bid on BEAD, you're doing fiber, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And are you also kind of gradually making your coax networks fiber? I know that's something we've
been deploying fiber, what we call fiber deeper, into our network for decades. We have this hybrid fiber coax network. There's some statistic I should probably know about how many hundreds of thousands of miles of fiber we actually have. The last mile is predominantly coax, but what we're able to do is this new network we're deploying called the Xfinity 10G. It's not really a network, it's an upgrade. And we're able to deliver multi-gigabit symmetrical speeds to the end user.
Symmetrical speeds, so
symmetrical.
Similar up and down.
Absolutely. And we're going to be able to do that multi-gigabit, and that's already been announced. Millions of customers are already on this network, and over time we'll be turning on this capability. And the point is, the customer doesn't care whether it's going through. They think, first of all, they all think Wi-Fi is what they're using. The customers really don't care whether it's coax, whether it's fiber. What they want is that capability.
Yeah.
And if we can deliver that capability efficiently over the HFC network and get 60 million homes and businesses without having to, be ripping out the ground, tearing up streets, that's a real advantage. And then we'll have resources for these expansions, which will be fiber-based. There's no doubt fiber is state-of-the-art, and we're going to do that in almost every single instance. But at the same time, we're able to take the existing communities. Look, we're talking a lot about rural areas, but Baltimore, Washington, Miami, Houston, they need state-of-the-art broadband too. And we're able to do that on our network right now. And in fact, a shameless plug, there's an interview I did with our chief network officer on our website, Drew. I don't know if we're competing here, where we spend about five or 6 minutes talking, where he really walks us through and explains what this means on the Xfinity 10G network. So we're going to do both. We're going to upgrade capabilities on our existing footprint,
right?
And then we're going to expand to these new areas where these government subsidies make it more economic to do so.
Before we leave this topic, Pierce, do you want to add anything on the matching funds question, how Live Oak plays a role in this?
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much to what the panelists have already mentioned. What I will say is that any public-private partnership, any matching funds, it really all it's doing is strengthening, one, the ability to build and scale broadband, but it's also building the credit profile. I mean, a small town with lacking resources, if they can find, for instance, that philanthropic organization to come and help bolster up the credit profile, it's going to help everyone involved. So I think just from the private lending side, I would just say that a public-private partnership, matching funds, all that does is strengthen the credit profile and feasibility of the network construction.
All right. So I promised a discussion of, did you want to say something else, Angela?
Nope.
No, you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure I do, but yeah.
We can talk about other things at the same time. We can talk and chew gum at the same time, but ACP. Okay. David, you mentioned it. It's been talked about, perhaps not as much as other fora. When in the discussion with Senator Hickenlooper and Brandy Ryder of Colorado, I got a lot of questions on that. I probably only put a few minutes at the end. So let's talk more about this. Now, basically, the issue is that when the pandemic hit, the FCC first got some commitments from private providers to not cut off people's bills. And then there became an emergency connectivity fund that offered $50, I believe, a month. And then that was just sort of temporary money. And then we got, when the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, passed, about 16, 17, 18 billion of that 62 billion, 65 billion included funding for this affordable connectivity program. And it offers $30 a month subsidies in low-income areas. And then I think, is it $50 for tribal areas? 75 for tribal areas.
And now just 75 for high-cost areas.
Okay.
FCC just-
Okay, thank you.
just
Thank you.
last
That's
week.
hot off the press
Hot off
last
the
week.
presses, yeah.
Broadband Breakfast had the story. So what are your thoughts? Oh, and the key is the fund is going to run out.
Yeah.
We're going to exhaust that 16 whatever billion like sometime next year, right? Is anyone have any thoughts on what we do about this? Because in some ways, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because we want to promote ACP so people can get it and use it, but no plans right now to renew it, replenish it, change it. So actually, let's start with you, Angela, and then Steve, and come back this side here. What do you think about
The
this?
first thing we need to do is we need to put a Band-Aid on it and have it continue for the short term, right? And whether that's another 18 billion or more. Right now, we're running about $500 million a month on the ACP. And so it'll run out sometime next year. And we're pushing hard to get more people signed up, but yet it's only gonna last 6 months. It's only gonna last 8 months, 10 months. We need to put a Band-Aid on it. And then we need the FCC to do an overhaul of USF or some other fund to look at how do we continue this long term. I also think the states need to do some things internally, because that FCC rehaul of USF is going to take time. And I don't feel like the federal government is open to keeping the $18 billion renewing and renewing and renewing. We know we need it. We know people are relying on this. I think Comcast has led the way with Internet Essentials and being able to serve low-income communities. And ACP adds to that, where in areas where we don't have that infrastructure. And so I think it's super important. Also, a lot of people are relying on it for their BEAD funding, right? They're saying, this is my affordability project. I have signed up for ACP to be able to be a provider that offers this service, and now it's going to go away. What is their affordability? How are they sustainable? How is removing the ACP going to affect those smaller companies who have done important damage? So yes, a Band-Aid, and I've talked to our senator staff about it, saying, yes, we need this Band-Aid. We need to get something. But then beyond that, we need to look at what we can do else, whether that's a $2 tax per state. I mean, we're $100 million a year. We can't just say $100 million.
We're meaning Washington State.
We have 290,000 people signed up for ACP. So that's $100,000 or $100 million a year. And it's just going to grow. So what can we do? What can we do as a state to support that as well?
Well, thanks for that very informed analysis. And basically, just to be clear, you're suggesting the two-part process, a renewal and then a revamp of USF. Steve, what do you think?
Boy, if I had the answer to that, I'd be in a different position than I am now. No, you know, it's a really important question, and this is a program that a lot of our members take advantage of. A lot of our members really see as a great opportunity to serve the communities that they're in better, especially those rural communities in many cases. One of the things I was really excited to hear about is states thinking about how do they approach that in the future using BEAD money. And Louisiana floated the idea of, if they have some BEAD money left over, using that for perhaps a state level ACP approach while we sort this out at the federal level. There needs to be a federal answer, obviously, and I think there needs to be some kind of sustainable federal answer. We're supposed to continue to engage in that question federally, but I am excited to see what states will do to approach that number as they begin thinking about it as well. It'll be a very interesting time to talk about that.
I'll just add a couple of things. One is absolutely with the USF overhaul. I mean, I feel this has been the third rail of broadband policy since USF began with the Joint Task Force in the 90s, right? But we need to have a serious conversation. The House just announced a committee to review USF. Obviously, the FCC just delivered their report on USF. So like wheels are turning, but they're turning so slowly, and they will not turn fast enough to make sure that we are keeping folks connected. There's a great example. Albemarle County in Virginia offers a $20 a month subsidy on top of ACP, which I think is amazing. They found it was so important. They're using general revenue funds. They're not even using our CARES Act. They're doing it just on their own, but that's not sustainable because other counties can't. Other states won't be able to do that as well. So we need to make sure that it's fair. The other thing that I think ACP reminds us of is that the digital divide will continue in a post-BEAD world, right? Because the digital divide is tethered so much to other structural inequality, right? You know, there are a lot of things that folks can't afford. So we need to remember, as we're thinking about life in a BEAD world, we also need to be thinking about what does connectivity and affordability look like post-BEAD. And I think affordability factors so much into this. We know that more people don't access internet because they can't afford it, not because they don't have access to it. So this has got to be on the top of everybody's mind to make sure that our families are staying connected, even when the money runs out.
Yes.
I'm hearing maybe May or June of 2024. But who knows what happens with the $75 now? It's gonna accelerate the depletion. Yeah.
Pierce?
Nothing really to add. I mean, I think that from the ACP, it is something that we need. It's something that for folks that cannot afford simple broadband connectivity, it's something that we need to keep in place. We need to make sure that everyone has access to that. In terms of grand strategies to fix it, you know, I wouldn't disagree with any of the ideas that have been floated around the panel right now. It's really just a matter of, again, making sure that the goal is broadband connectivity for all, and however we can accomplish that, you know, I'm in favor of.
David, do you agree that we really need to kind of do a substantial overhaul of the Universal Service Fund to make a long-term solution to this problem?
Well, let me table USF for just a minute, the third rail here, trying to get me not invited back home. But let me turn to ACP for a minute, right? The question of what Congress will do, who knows, right? Washington is littered with people who can, you know, guess what Congress does, and they've gotten it wrong lately a lot. So hopefully Congress does get its act together. What I wanted to point out, though, Drew, on this, and there are a lot of challenges, but I wanted the scale of the problem. And we know we talk a lot about BEAD, 42 billion. Congress dedicated a lot less for ACP and for digital equity. But if you look at the numbers, and this is Pew data, roughly about 20 to 25% of the country are not connected at home to a robust broadband connection. About 8 million of those don't have access. And that's what's called rural, unbuilt, and that's what BEAD is meant to address. And Congress has dedicated 42 billion in BEAD to try to close that 8 million person gap. But we still have 60, 70 million people who have broadband passing their home, and for a variety of reasons aren't taking broadband. And that's what we were addressing. Angela mentioned our Internet Essentials program, which has evolved to, of course, accommodate all the ACP programs. And that's where we, you know, it seems almost underfunded. So when Congress is thinking, should we do ACP again? It was a lot of money. In reference to what? In comparison to what? In comparison to BEAD? No, it wasn't a lot. And the problem is much bigger, just numbers wise. Now, of course, building a network is a different scale. I get it, than connecting people. But, you know, Chris, there are a lot of reasons people aren't connecting. Affordability is clearly one of them. But there's also relevance. There's fear. We've been in this space a long time, work with Andrew and others like that. And there are a lot of reasons people don't connect. Affordability is clearly part of it. But even when we had a $10 product, we couldn't get people to connect. So we've invested a lot over the last couple of years in digital navigators to sort of figure out how to break that barrier. Because for us, we can't even imagine. And if we could afford, like, well, $10, of course. But even then, people are like, well, I don't want viruses in my home, or I don't have a computer. And even when we gave them a computer, there's all kinds of reasons people aren't adopting. But affordability is a big one, and ACP needs to be reauthorized by Congress to bridge that gap.
Why did you find people? I mean, you sort of started to answer the fears.
There's relevance. There's relevance is like, you know, and Catherine DeWitt does a lot of work in this space. Relevance, price, fear. There's age, I think, is a big one. Just older people, I think, are less adopters than the general population. And they're going to need to connect. Healthcare, right? Our government services are all moving online.
Yeah.
The IRS is eliminating paper filings. So we've got to figure out how to get all of these people online. And clearly availability is a challenge, and that's what we've dedicated BEAD for. But adoption, when the network is available, and that's got to be part of your BEAD plan too.
Yeah.
When you are partnering with someone to build the network, what is their adoption strategy? How is we know some people are going to be chasing the truck down the street. That's for sure. But other people are back. I don't need that. I've lived my whole life without it, and I don't need it now. And so how are we as a community and as an ISP going to work together to bridge that gap? And so those are the barriers. But it's amazing. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine, anyone at this round table here, to imagine why you wouldn't subscribe to broadband for $10 or free with ACP. You're still not penetrating. When the digital adoption gap, even with all these folks, 15 million, I think, on ACP, we still have many millions who aren't taking the program. It's about a third subscribe, I think, third of the availability.
Yeah.
So why aren't the 2/3 taking it when it's free? So money isn't.
Well, it takes time.
the
It
only
takes time to
channel.
build awareness. It's a very bureaucratic process, getting, and then again, there's this kind of trust issue about, will it be around, right? Will it in fact be around? Because those who are going to be, dig into it to understand are going to realize, hey, this money might run out.
And I think, just to piggyback on what you were saying, David, I mean, we have now at a point where building is not enough, right? It is networks, it is affordability, it is equity, it is literacy, and all of this has to happen simultaneously to make sure that we're reaching those communities. And we need to be reaching those communities where they are. I mean, I think someone pointed out yesterday in one of the keynotes that it's rather ironic that when the FCC originally rolled out ACP, they did it through emails and through their websites,
Right.
to reach people who didn't connect to the internet. I mean, that shows just what you were saying, like, I'm forgetting that there are different ways to reach people.
Yeah.
There's a great Merit network in Michigan actually attached stickers to takeout pizza boxes.
Right. Oh,
To
interesting.
tell people about broadband program. And I think this is just brilliant. Everyone likes a pizza on a Friday night, right?
Right.
So, and you don't need, well, increasingly you need internet to get a
Order
pizza,
it.
but you can still go.
You can still call.
You can still
right?
call. You can still go and pick it up, right? There's the sticker telling you about, all the broadband programming that's going on in northern Michigan. That's the kind of creativity that we need to reach those people who otherwise are off the grid.
And that's what the private sector does, right? Like, we are going to community fairs. We have tents set up.
Yeah.
And we have, people in sort of our teams of community fairs are sitting there pitching one by one.
Right.
And you've got to do it, there's a language relevance.
Absolutely.
There's socially relevant.
Yeah.
You're targeting one group with pizzas. Maybe if there's an immigrant community,
Faith organizations have been
faith-based.
so successful here. Yeah.
So it takes a lot of work to get to close this
Yeah.
20% gap.
Yeah.
What is surprising to me is that, again, there's no disagreement about ACP, not just in this panel or even this conference hall, but I talked to a lot of people on this, and even people that I would think would be skeptical of government spending. They say, well, it's positive because it's a voucher style expenditure, right? So there's widespread agreement, but in spite of all that, when I asked Senator Hickenlooper about this, he said, well, we're probably going to come down to the wire and then we'll renew it for a short time. And not exactly a heartening reply for those who want this replenished.
So I got the same response, by the way, from Senator Campbell. Well, it'll probably come down to the wire. And it's like, no, this is an important one.
Yeah.
You need to speak up into this. But I gotta say, first of all, brilliant, those stickers. I would say we hung those little pieces of paper where you rip something off. Post offices,
Right, that's
bars,
awesome. Yeah.
everywhere, right? It's like, because we were doing the same thing, right? Okay, ACP, come to our website, come to Facebook, do all these different things, and it doesn't reach people who need it.
Right.
So Drew, in hour 2, you want to do a civics? What's wrong with Congress? Is that
Well,
is that what we want to explore?
the thought did occur to me, last week, I think Fitch downgraded America's credit rating like 2 months after the crisis was averted. And obviously it was a very sharp reaction to the administration. This is unwarranted. But the thing that Fitch cited was this kind of systemic uncertainty in America's budgeting process. And there's a little bit of truth to that, right? We do take things down to the wire all the time. We have just a few more minutes. Let's kind of wrap with thoughts on the future. Like what are the applications that you're looking to? Jeff Gavlinsky, the organizer of this show, always really emphasizes that. He had a little robot yesterday in the keynote to showcase the importance of high, not just high bandwidth and high speed, but low latency connections in the applications of the future. Let's just go down the row and say, what are some of the future applications you're looking to or hearing about or wanting to see progressed in the future, Steve?
Well, it's such an exciting time for fixed wireless right now. I mean, what our vendor members are doing in terms of getting more bandwidth and more speed and finding ways to cut down on line of sight challenges and other things. It's a really exciting time in fixed wireless right now. We're just continuing to evolve and grow as that customer need comes on. So really seeing kind of what we're able to do with the technologies that we're able to deploy, it's very exciting to see where that goes.
Angela?
Obviously, we're focused on the funding in rural communities, right? But beyond that, I think David said it as well. We have to provide applications that make the internet relevant to people. In addition to that, we have to accept that not everyone who is purchasing an internet connection knows the scope of what they can do. So on two levels, how do we make it more relevant? And then how do we teach people what else they could possibly do? And I know the digital navigators have been a huge part of that. They're within my county as well. But does it fall on the infrastructure providers now too, to look at some of that? And so I think that's the next steps beyond the actual funding.
Pierce?
Personally, I just think that I'm most excited about the momentum technology to kind of scale, whether it's fixed wireless, whether it's fiber, being able to be a part of the industry right now is most exciting because there is no one size fits all. And so as we're talking about matching funds, as we're talking about states and local municipalities getting involved, as we're talking about technology, it can be truly a bespoke process and funding strategy for everyone. So that's probably what I'm most excited about going forward.
Thank you, Pierce. Christopher?
Maybe not something I'm most excited about, but something I'm going to be watching very closely is to look at development for climate sustainability of our networks. The world is heating up. This is going to be the coolest summer going forward.
That's
right?
Coolest. Wow.
And it was so hot. So what are we doing to make sure that our networks are, I don't want to say climate proof, but at least climate resilient? We're going to see much more water, right? All water levels are rising. That is going to be damaging to buried cables, for instance. So I'm going to be watching very closely about what especially BEAD winners are doing when they're winning this money to address climate resiliency of networks.
I think, Drew, what I'm most excited about with all this connectivity we're going to be bringing is probably like remote education and the ability to not have to go to Happy Valley and maybe listen to Chris teach. Well, if I can't make
Happy Valley, we're so happy.
If I can't make it, maybe, but the ability for everyone to learn, to be able to bring education to their homes, regardless of where they live, is an exciting one. But that's maybe my opinion. What I think is the reality is, it turns out the killer app seems to be video. And people are consuming a ton of video, entertaining video, producing a lot of video content. And that seems to be what consumes most of the content on the internet, even through COVID. Even with all the Zooming and working from home, all of that makes up about 3 or 4% of the internet. Over 65% of the internet is consuming video, Netflix, Amazon, YouTube, Google.
Broadband breakfast.
And broadband breakfast today. So I don't know if that's going to change, but that is what the internet is primarily used for today. But opening the door to accessibility to education, to people with accessibility challenges, that's what I think is most excited by the connectivity we're going to be bringing everywhere.
Well, before we turn to thank our panel, we want to thank our audience for being with us. You not only braved an earlier time, normally we're at 12 noon Eastern time, and we will stick with that time, but we had a good number of you. And all of these events, right after they're published or right after they're live streamed, are live online at Broadband Breakfast. So you can certainly watch this and all others. We also have some exciting events coming up. We have next week On the 16th, we'll be talking about the future of online education, very appropriate to David's point. And the week following will be live from Fiber Connect at noon Eastern time. That fits with the schedule. And also, don't forget the BEAD Implementation Summit, obviously the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program. The BEAD Implementation Summit, hosted by Broadband Breakfast, will delve in a day-long fashion into the state broadband leaders and their thoughts, into issues of matching funds and public-private partnerships, and talking about problems that still need to be solved as we go into the future, as well as looking to the past and past programs. So we remind you to go to Broadband Breakfast to sign up. You can sign up at the registration, or I should say the early bird rate of $145 to attend on September 21st. On behalf of our great panelists, Steve Schwerbel of WISPA, Angela Bennick of Kitsap Public Utility District, and also the American Association of Public Broadband, Pierce Verchik, head of broadband lending at Live Oak Bank, Dr. Christopher Ali, chair in telecommunications and professor of telecommunications at Penn State, and David Don, who is the Senior Vice President for Public Policy at Comcast. I'm Drew Clark. We'll see you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.